Hi there, this is Helen Tarrant again from here with our whole team. Wow, it's massive. Welcome to another episode of Commercial Property Roadshow. Today you're here with Helen Tarrant, and I'm actually going to do the third part of our uplift project or properties. So we've done part one, part two a couple of weeks ago. Then I've been on the road with my team for the last couple of weeks. So you've had some inspection videos, and now I'm back home in the office. Now I'm going to take you through part three of a uplift property. Now this little property is a little bit different because it's more of a long-term play, so it's not an immediate flip. It is for the type of person who is looking for a property that they can tweak in the short term and then hold out for the long term to maybe a knock down and rebuild. So you need to have time in the market for the market to mature a little bit, for the value of the property to grow, but also for the rents to rise in the area to gentrify as well. So this is a little bit of a different play to the previous ones I've been talking about. And I've got Stephen joining us here, and he is, some of you may have seen him on our previous videos. So he is actually going to help out and actually give us his expertise on the building part of the business, so that we can give you more of a fuller picture of how you would look at this property from a building point of view. So it's all about when you are looking at a journey or a property together, there is multifaceted, and the property is ever evolving, which means that you might start out with a property that have 2, 3, 4 vacancies, or the property could be run down, and during the time you negotiate or you're in due diligence, you end up doing a lot more work on the property, and then ultimately you come out with an action plan. Especially for these uplift properties, you're not going to be able to do it immediately, but you have an action plan. So this property I'm actually going to show you. It's not this background behind me, but it is a property in Ipswich. It is actually purchased on the lower end. It was advertised for $659,000, and we got it for $600,000 for our client. They're a young couple who bought this property, and we're walking actually their first commercial property, and we're actually walking them through the process of uplifting this project. So I'm going to hand this over to Stephen, who's going to show you the IM. And a little bit about the area, and also then what is the long-term building view on this property. So, Stephen, take it away.
All righty. So, as Helen said, today is an unusual property in that it's a longer-term play rather than a direct uplift. So, to actually make this particular property work, we need to do a few tweaks initially, and then with the aim of basically sitting back, enjoying collecting the rent for, say, 10 years, and then you get the pleasure of knocking it down and getting it out of the way so that we can build something new and exciting. That, in a nutshell, is the play. Now, a lot of people don't, feel comfortable buying something with the aim of knocking it down, but frankly, it's just a block of dirt that'll pay you income until you decide what you're really going to do with it. So as we look through the IM, I'll go over some of the bits and pieces, show you where it is, and make sure that it all makes sense for you, and then we can go through and explain it in more detail. So,
well, one of the things that I wanted you guys to consider is a lot of people buy residential for land banking. So they go out and they buy a piece of land in the greenfield area, or they buy a bit of land on fringe or in different suburbs, and they bank on that for several years, not having a return for that property. Well, when you do a long-term play in the commercial space, treat it as if it's land banking, as if it's the same, you're going in with the same mindset, but looking at it as land banking, but with an income. So it actually has that added value to it.
Yeah, like 8 or 9% holding income, which in Resi world, unless you've got a meth lab, is pretty unusual. So ballpark idea. So this is Ipswich up in Queensland. So that's inland from Brisbane a little bit. And Eastern Heights, Grange Road, this is our property here, is just a little bit out from Ipswich, CBD. So this gives us a better idea of the location. So we're just across the road from the service station and just up the road from the medical precinct. So that puts us into a reasonably good area. And there is also some new units built just to the left-hand side of the screen there, which we can't really see. But the area is up and coming, or as Helen calls it, gentrifying. I think that's too fancy a word, so I just use the word getting fancier, or the term getting fancier. So this is what you'd be buying. We've got 3 shops. Now, shops 2 and 3 have got tenants in them. Shop 3's got a fish and chip shop. Shop 2's got a hairdresser, and shop 1 is empty. Now, in the back, there's a kitchen and storeroom, which looks like it escaped out of the 70s, pretty much untouched. There's a bathroom over here on the top right, and a storage room, which is actually another bathroom, but it's so full of junk that they're calling it a storage room. So that's what it looks like from the air. So you can tell that it's got a reasonably good roof. A fair bit of parking. It's right on the corner. There's a fair bit of space. There's an outdoor seating area here, which could be reconfigured and rejigged a little bit for the takeaway. And it's just in a good location, and that's what it looks like from across the road. Now, this property is not something you're ever going to get excited about in terms of its physical looks, right? It's a little bit like me. It's past its prime and needs a makeover. So I think if we look at it for what it is and understand what the longer term play is, it'll all make sense. Now, we're talking a 10-year play here. Now, again, any of you guys know that if you're talking to someone who's lived in the area for 40 or 50 years, they'll always say to you, oh, when I was your age, I could have bought that property for, and it's always around about 1/10 of what it is now. And I always ask, well, why didn't you buy it? And the answer is, well, I didn't have that much money back then. So the aim of this property is we buy it, we hold it for 10 years, and then at the end of that 10-year period, we're getting towards the end of that 10-year period, we put a DA into council with the aim of redeveloping it, with perhaps some new shops on the bottom and perhaps some apartments on the top. And, excuse me, there is enough parking in this area to be able to do that, fit that in. And I think this could be a really good long-term play. Okay. Now, the next thing we're going to do is have a look at some photos. And this will give us...
photos.
Sorry?
We love photos.
We do. If a picture tells 1,000 words, you're about to get 56,000 words. All right.
Again, when you look at the photos, you'll know that when you do an uplift property, one of the major things that most people mistakenly think about an uplift property is that they want the tidy, neat, set and forget property wrapped up into an uplift. It doesn't work that way. When you get an uplift property, this is what the property looks like. It is not going to be in the best shape. It is not going to be the neatest property. It's not going to be the best fit out. But remember, if you're looking at this as a long-term play and then you're getting income, you do what you can with this property, and in the future it's going to be a knockdown and build, then that is a different mindset you're going into the deal compared to, I just want the perfect thing that's wrapped up and put in a box with a bow on top.
Yeah, well, you can have that, but you can't get an uplift after 10 years and you can't get, no maintenance. You can, you get to pick one of them. So, one of the first things you'll see from this photo is it's a reasonably flat block of dirt. It doesn't fall very much, which is good for future development. It's just next door to the pharmacy and some other bits and pieces. That's the fish and chip shop. It's nothing terribly glamorous, but it's been there for a long time and it keeps paying the rent week after week. I have no idea what that is, but let's move on.
It is a frog that has a coin. And it's giving coins to it's a good luck sign.
Excellent.
And a cat.
All right, excellent. So you can tell by this, you look at this property, it's a lot old, it's a lot tired, and it needs a lot of work, but we're not going to do that work to it. We're going to do enough cosmetic work to keep it going, which in this case is probably going to be $70,000 or $80,000. We're going to keep it for 10 years, get the other shop rented out. Once we get the other shop rented out, it'll give us a little bit over 8%. Now, I don't know about many places where you can get an 8% holding income for the next 10 years whilst you're waiting to do your development. It's a great long-term double play, right? Keep going through, back of the fish and chip shop, deep fryers, which were cleaned in 1976, storeroom, 1977, right? It's just, it's just a fish and chip shop. Now, this is not the fish and chip shop anymore. This is the hairdressers. You can tell that because there's no fish and chip stuff anymore. Sorry, I must be tired. Even the jokes aren't funny today. So hairdressers, been there for a long time. Saturday mornings, busy as. They've got their own washing facilities in the back. Again, it's nicely prepared, nicely set up. This part will happily be rented out for the next 10 years. The floor's been done not too long ago, and it's just a nice part of the world. Now, this is where it gets interesting. This is the empty shop, shop one, if you remember that first diagram we looked at. Now, it needs a bit of work to be able to be rented out. It needs a paint job. It needs some lights changed. There's a kitchen out the back that needs replacing. On the back of that white wall is, ugly 1970s fake timber paneling. There's brick walls. It's just a fairly amateur hour looking property. That's out the back. So they're the two bathrooms I talked about before. And again, the property's had a little bit of work done to it over the years, but just enough really to keep it going. And I think that's as much as we can expect. That's the grease trap. That's one of the storerooms, which was a bathroom. And we just keep going and going and going. Now, we can look through all of that and sort of say, well, geez, this building's old and tired. But again, once we get that last place rented out, we're getting 8%. Now, 8% for a hold is huge. And if you think about this building play as a long term, what's it going to be worth in 10 years' time? Probably roughly double what it is now, maybe 80, 90% more than what it is now. So if we say, okay, we're going to get the holding income for that time, by the time it gets to year 9 and 10, we start doing some research. We put a DA into council, we organise building quotes, and we get prepared to knock it down. That is the longer term play. Now, you might be saying, well, why don't you just renovate it? Well, one of the things that came up when we did the building and pest inspection on this is that there are issues with the footings, there are issues with the concrete slabs, and there is some cracks in the brickwork in the back of the building. Now, it's been there for probably 40 odd years, and those cracks have developed sometime over that 40 years. They haven't developed recently because there's, one of the tricks is you have a look inside the crack and there's actually dust inside the crack. So that hasn't happened in the last few years anyway. So, and also the concrete slab on the floor, when they built it, they didn't do the footings terribly well. It's on a clay soil, and over time it's going to move a little bit. So we're certainly not going to be building another story on top of that. And we got quotes in to repair the concrete floor, which were about $100,000, and we're not going to be doing that either, because by the time you spend $100,000 on that, $300,000 tidying that up and something else, you're at the point where you've spent more than what the building is worth to knock it down and rebuild it, and it probably still won't have strong enough footings to put another level or two on top of it anyway. So what we're doing with this is we're taking an educated guess that the building has only moved a certain amount, which is probably 10 millimetres over 40 years. Now, if you read the building and pest inspection, it's all doom and gloom, and it's telling you that the world's ending and the floor's cracked and it's all moved. It's not as bad as it sounds. If a building has moved 10 millimetres, which is about the thickness of your finger, over 40 years, you could take an educated guess that unless something really bizarre happens, it's not going to do much more over the next 10 years. So what we've said with this particular property is, okay, we're going to tidy it up and make it look prettier to attract a tenant. That's what we've got to do. We've got to get a tenant in there who's going to walk in and fill it up and pay, I think it's about $16,000 or $17,000 per year rent, which is just over $300 a week. We want them in there for the next 10 years so that they're paying all of the, not just outgoings, but we're also getting a good holding income, and people are, these people who have bought this particular property can start to bank some money so that when, they can pay down the mortgage, or they can have the money sitting there ready that in 10 years' time they can demolish and rebuild. And And again, once you get to them, the options are many and numerous and varied. You can strata it, you can sell off the resi and keep the commercial, you can sell the whole thing in one line. There's lots of stuff you could do in 10 years' time. But the key here is to get really good holding income for 10 years, accept and acknowledge the fact that over that 10 years, there's going to be some more cracks in the building. It's just par for the course. But it is a steel frame that holds up the roof. So we're pretty sure that the thing won't fall down. As I said, 10 millimetres in 40 years is not a lot. So it's an educated guess that in 10 years it's going to be okay, and then we do the redevelop. That, in a nutshell, is the play.
Yeah, so there is many and varied. So the whole point of this video is to actually explain to you there's actually many and varied strategies and basically deals out there for commercial property. And whether you become a seasoned investor or whether you're just starting out in your journey, there's actually a strategy for you. And that strategy is actually blended based on what you need. Now, something like this will require someone who has and tolerate a little bit of risk, someone who can tolerate the fact that they're not getting a perfect building. The building's bought as is, so you're not going to be able to go back to the vendor and say, hey, I want another 50 grand off for this, this, and this. You have one negotiation, which is why we end up with 600, and it was advertised at 659, and we end up with one negotiator. That's the deal we ended up with. We do all the DD, we work out exactly how much it costs, and then we work through what needs to be done to make the property tenantable for that last tenant. And that's really the sole and only focus at the moment for probably the next 3 to 6 months, is getting that tenancy up to scratch so it can be tenanted out. Then the property has reached its full potential at that point as is. You're going to be doing some stuff. There's probably some grease traps to be serviced and tidied up, and there's probably bits and pieces on that old building that needed to be done. But ultimately, then you hold that property at just above 8%, because by the time that's tenanted, it's going to be sitting close to 8.5%, sitting between 8 to 8.5%. Now, that in an area, Ipswich, which is 30 minutes from Brisbane CBD, and a lot of that area, the population is migrating out, is a great yield, because somewhere around there is now selling between around that maximum at 7. Most of them are listing around 6.75%. So if you look at that and what you are buying, obviously being an older building, you would demand a higher yield. Even at a higher yield, you are still ahead of the market. And as you sit there and you wait for rental increases to happen each year, that also increases the return on that property. And if you recycle that, being if you're young and working, you can work your full-time job, let the property essentially pay itself off in the next 10 years. So all that positive cash can be recycled back into that property, or alternatively for another deposit for another property. But ultimately, you could have that property actually almost paid off in 10 years' time. And then there is so much easier to go and borrow for construction if you wanted to borrow on that property to knock down and build, or like if you want to then at the time get a DA sell it. There's like multiple avenues of exit for that property. But either way, the game on this is it's a long-term hold, and you're picking up the cash flow in the meantime. So it is a different mindset going forward. And if you're wanting a quick flip within 12 to 24 months, this is not your deal. This is for someone who has a longer aim and wanting to build a long-term portfolio, because while they have this in the background, they could be adding 2, 3, 4, 5 other properties over the next 10 years as well into their portfolio that are different and varied. And I guess at the end of the day,
and just even on the way through now, right? At the moment, there's only 2 out of the 3 tenants in there. But even with just those 2, it's paying just under 6%. So it's already covering all of its costs. Even now, the icing is the extra tenant. But I know you said before it's someone who needs a higher level of risk. But if we bought a $600,000 resi property, there's very few chances that it would actually be paying for itself. So
bedroom apartment in Brisbane, probably.
Well, yeah, and but it's unlikely that would. Yeah. By the time you pay your strata and your bank and everything else, there's no way it'd cover its costs. So whilst it's a more risky thing in that there is probably a 1 chance in 1,000 that, something catastrophic could go wrong with it over the next 10 years, it's still paying for itself during that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So So guys, if you are looking for a commercial property strategy or a community and actually someone to help work with you to build out a portfolio and to actually mentor you through this, because it's not, if you're a first time newbie in the market, you can't just pick up a deal like this and expect to run it on your own. There's so many pitfalls that you could get into, so many things. You could be looking at it going, I'm going to pull the deal because I have to underpin and spend 100 grand on this property. Whereas if your long-term play is 10 years and knock down and rebuild, then you're not going to be paying for that. So it is all about how you look at the deal, and that's why our expert team is here to do, is actually to guide you through it, so you know where not to spend the money and where to spend the money, and what is a deal breaker and what isn't a deal breaker. So that's why we're here. We're here actually to support you. We're a network, so we've got Stephen here with building, but myself who help you to source and find the property. We've got a due diligence team. We've got a sourcing team who is actually always calling agents and talking to people, finding out what's on the ground, what's the current yield, what's happening on the market. And we've got inspections, so we actually always have our finger on the pulse, and we can actually guide you through that, especially right now in this hot market, because these are the strategies that are going to put you ahead of the market rather than going somewhere and buying off the shelf. And which is one of the reasons why you're part of the community and you learn from us as part of your journey as well. So if you're interested in learning more or find out more about what we can do for you, reach out to us on a strategy session. There's a link below to book in. Otherwise, find out more about me at helentarrant.com or unicorn.com.au, or email me at helen@commercialpropertycashflow. So until next time, I'll see you in the next inspection. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you, Stephen.